Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 20 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Binns, and I'm so excited about today's episode yet again. The excitement just never ends with me, eh? But today we're going to be talking about this week's main event in the UFC. Dricus du Plessis defends his title against Strickland in a rematch for the middleweight belt. Obviously, a huge fight in terms of the future of the middleweight division. And also, we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion about Israel Adesanya and obviously the result of his fight last weekend where he got knocked out by Imavov. That's a big, tough one for me because obviously I'm a huge fan of him and I made an entire video about him not being washed and why I thought the dialogue surrounding his name was relatively disrespectful. And whilst perhaps there's some things to talk about in terms of the future for Israel Adesanya, I do need to still talk about the discussion, the reaction to that video that I had, and just the continuous dialogue about the future of Izzy's career and what's next for him. And yeah, we'll get into that. But let's get into this main event this weekend. Also, I just wanted to mention very, very quickly that if you are not subscribed, please subscribe. About 94% of the people watching these videos and the short form content are not yet part of the family. Come join the Backseat Fighter Podcast community. This is where we grow MMA healthily. We talk about things that actually matter. We're not just here saying things for views and likes. And maybe I should be, but just come join, subscribe, and yeah, let's just get straight back to the episode. We're going to only focus on the main event this week because I think it really deserves its own episode. And of course, you know, I just really want to get into it in detail right here. So obviously we know this is a rematch and we're going to talk about that first fight in the beginning. So then when did they fight? So they fought after Strickland beat Israel Adesanya, in which at the time was a huge upset. Nobody expected it. Strickland himself was kind of shocked by it, obviously from his background in terms of where he came from, how he started fighting, you know, the struggle he's gone through. He spoke recently, even this fight week, about the fact that he was sleeping in the gym. He couldn't pay for his rent. He was cycling to the gym because he couldn't afford a car. And, you know, then he became middleweight champion of the world at the time, beating one of the greatest middleweights of all time, which was Israel Adesanya. Now, I spoke a lot about, in my video with Israel, about Israel Adesanya, apologies, and the podcast episode then, about how I thought that fight, obviously huge credit to Sean Strickland for getting that win, but how I thought that fight was slightly skewed in terms of Israel Adesanya coming into that fight injured. He didn't take anything away from Sean Strickland. He looked incredible in that fight. You know, he dropped Izzy in that first round with a clean right hand, landed a bunch of follow-up shots. That was kind of a foreshadowing of what Imavov did to him in the end, in terms of him being Israel Adesanya. But Sean Strickland obviously claims the belt, and then in his immediate first title defense, I believe in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong about that, somebody please correct me. He then goes up against Dricus du Plessis, who had just come off an incredible win against Robert Whittaker. Dricus du Plessis at the time obviously denied himself that title shot in terms of going up against Adesanya and decided to go for Robert Whittaker instead. Now, they meet in the octagon, and the first round, obviously, you start to see Sean Strickland come out and impose his style, his will on the fight, which is going to be very key, obviously, in the second fight. Sean Strickland comes out in that first round, beautiful jab, beautiful teeps, and you see Dricus du Plessis is not yet comfortable in the stand-up in terms of the range with Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland stands up so straight. For MMA, it's not usual. He kind of has that Philly shell boxing style. And the biggest thing you notice when you watch Sean Strickland fight is his incredible ability to check leg kicks or evade them altogether. I mean, DDP in that first round fires about 3 or 4, maybe even more of those. And every single time, Sean Strickland's front leg goes straight up, turns out slightly, and is able to completely check those kicks. And you start to think, wow, Dricus du Plessis relies a lot on those big kicks and a lot on his ability to damage his opponent's legs and rush in on them. So what's going to be the strategy? So after that first round, a very dominant, in my opinion, first round with Sean Strickland able to use that jab, use that teep, use his 1-2, evade the range, always kind of leans back. It looks kind of funky, but is able to get out of the way and evade shots. And you see what starts to happen in this fight is complete and utter in-fight changes, in-fight modifications that DDP is able to make. Comes out in that second round, starts absolutely firing shots to the body. Now, the first 2-3 minutes of that round, you kind of see a continuation of that first round. You still see DDP trying to figure his way out, how he's going to enter range, how he's going to start doing damage to Sean Strickland. I think for me, the turning point in that second round is when DDP decides to blitz in like he always does. He looks kind of clumsy, as we know, throws the 1-2 to the body, and they sound loud. I mean, you can hear it through the broadcast. DDP shots do land with a thud in general. And then you start to see him kind of pile on those body shots. At one point, I believe he throws a switch kick, or if he's already standing in the orthodox front, just a lead body kick with that left leg that lands to the right side of Sean Strickland. And you start to see him kind of target that body, which opens up opportunities for him later. Into that third round, you kind of see a similar thing, but we see a bit more of the wrestling from Dricus du Plessis and a bit more of that ability to close the range in kind of the clumsy way he does, but he does a thing where he punches with the left hand and steps with the right foot and does the alternate vice versa, is able to crash in and kind of talked, I think it was with Michael Bisping. No, apologies. It was with Demetrius Johnson, Mighty Mouse Johnson. He talks about why his style is how it is. He was very established in kickboxing, K1 kickboxing before he was an MMA fighter. And he used to use that crashing in because there was corners obviously in K1. And in a ring, if you think about it, if you can crash somebody into that corner, you don't really have to be the most technical to be able to trap them there and just tee off and get to the body shot. So he still applies kind of that same style to MMA. It's just the fact that the cage is an octagon, more circular, and is able, and opponents are able to kind of slip out of that a bit more, which is why it looks even a bit more clumsy than it probably did in his K1 days. But going back to that third round, you start to see him integrate the wrestling. You start to see him starting controlling where the fight is taking place. And that is so key because in that third round, you start to see Strickland be really pushed back, him on the back foot, him still able to land those jabs and those teeps and even go to the leg kicks of Dricus du Plessis and able to stuff takedowns. But this fight, this matchup specifically is all about who is moving forward. Both of these fighters like to apply immense pressure to their opponents. And I just want to go back to Sean Strickland very quickly. What makes him so special in that first round and why it's relevant when I move on to the fourth round is when he's fresh, when he's calm, when he's composed, he is one of the most sharp fighters you will ever see in the UFC. And what I mean by sharp is he's so battle ready. He spars so much. The majority of his training is sparring, which probably on a medical perspective is not advisable, but I don't think Sean Strickland cares about stuff like that. And, you know, he doesn't spar with headgear. You see him sparring. He's in there so much that he knows human timing. He knows tells. He knows when you're going to throw a leg kick. He knows when you're going to the jab, to the 1-2, what your setups are. And he's a lot more intelligent in terms of the in-fight, breaking it down, people's strategies, people's timing, range, distance, rhythm, power, techniques that they like to throw than people give him credit for because of probably of his outside of the cage antics, what he says, his controversiality, you know, his Bryce Mitchell-esque stuff. I mean, it's not as bad as Bryce Mitchell, to be honest with you, but he does say a lot of controversial things. But in there, he's an absolute technician when it comes to defense, when it comes to timing. And that's why you see him able to check leg kicks in the way that he does. The problem is his style is very dependent on him moving forward in terms of damage. And this is what I'm going to explain when it comes to the fourth round and this entire matchup in general. So you start to see Dricus du Plessis control the range, control the direction of the fight. He's the one pushing Sean Strickland up against the cage. He's the one firing takedowns. And even if they weren't landing, which I think he landed about 6 out of 9, you know, he landed a good amount of takedowns and a good percentage of success rate with those takedowns. But he starts to obviously push Sean Strickland up against the cage. Now, heading into that fourth round, what you then start to see is that cut come into play. And now it's a bit controversial coming into this fight. It's a big theme of Sean Strickland. He spoke to Michael Bisping about the fact that, you know, it is technically an excuse. I'm just being a or whatever. But at the end of the day, you did see a stark difference between the Sean Strickland that was in that fight against DDP, albeit in my opinion, 2 rounds to 1 down. Getting that fourth round, that cut starts to really, really bother him. Now, it was a bad cut. Obviously, it was just above the eye and the blood was bleeding profusely, dripping into his eye, covering his vision completely. I can imagine it was insanely hard to deal with that. But at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me because I'm still kind of curious about this, I believe that cut was caused by a Dricus du Plessis right hand or an elbow. And then obviously Dricus du Plessis, being the actually more smart fighter than a lot of people give him credit for, is able to target that cut, make it worse, make it more of a problem for Sean Strickland. So then what you start to see is a bit more of a less composed Sean Strickland dealing with that cut. You see him wiping it a lot. And DDP is relentless, as we know. So DDP shown since he got that nose surgery, which I think was, I imagine, after the Darren Till fight. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong. We've seen a different output from DDP. He doesn't look so exhausted all the time. And although he does look a bit huffy and puffy, it's because his output is so high and he's carrying so much muscle mass. I mean, he throws everything into every shot, but he's still able to go for those 5 rounds. It's still dangerous at all times in the fight. So in that 4th round, when the eye is bleeding, DDP targets it, keeps going, gets the takedowns, going to the body, and he starts throwing very wild overhand shots that, he needs to throw. Because Sean Strickland, when he's in his stance, when he's in that Philly shell like this, you see him lean back like this and kind of put his arms out to try and block the shots. So you need to overthrow that right and overthrow those lead overhands to try and even get a connection, which Dricus du Plessis, in all fairness, was landing. Now, what do I think going into the 5th round as a pretty much what do you think it was? I believe that Dana White said after the fight that he thought Sean Strickland won this fight because he thought it was equal going into the 5th, and he thought Sean Strickland won the 5th. I agree that Sean Strickland won this 5th round, and it showed great composure in terms of the eye, in terms of what the cutman was able to do, in terms of his ability to get back the momentum, start pushing Dricus du Plessis back and firing that jab. I still believe that Dricus du Plessis won rounds 2, 3, and 4, which means I believe Sean Strickland won rounds 1 and 5. The problem with Sean Strickland, and this is what I really wanted to get into, is not his skill set. He's got very good boxing, as we know, very good defense, both with the kicks and with the punches. He's able to get out the way of your hands, and he's able to check your leg kicks like nobody I've ever seen in the sport. His wrestling defense, as he showed in that Dricus du Plessis fight, is immense. And people like Michael Bisping, who trained with Sean Strickland back in the day, said he's very good on the ground. It's surprising that he doesn't use it. Sean Strickland himself has said his corner always tells him to wrestle. But the problem with the way that Sean Strickland approaches fights, not for the fans, not for the UFC, not for his team, not for anyone else but himself, is that he is so defensively responsible and so strategic in his fight style. He doesn't want to just necessarily put you out cold. He wants to beat you up with the jab, with the teeps, with the 1-2, with the kind of the not the knockout shots. When you see Sean Strickland fight, he's not putting everything into every punch. He's tapping you up. He's beating you up. He's changing you. He's affecting you and damaging you over an extended period of time. The problem is that even when he is moving back, like in that 3rd or 4th round, he's still landing on Dricus. He's still landing those jabs. He's still landing those teeps to the body, but he's moving backwards. And because in a fight, the way judges look at it, they're going to look at octagon control. They're going to look at damage. They're going to look at things like that. Who's moving forward? Who's taking charge of the ring, the octagon? Even if he's landing those same shots like he was in the 1st round, but this time in the 3rd round, for example, he's moving backwards, he's not going to get that round. And it's what's caused him to lose a split decision like he did to Jared Cannonier. Now, even if you thought Sean Strickland won that fight, which arguably he did, it's still clear and obvious that he needs to sometimes be more mindful or more intentional about pushing the other man backwards. So where does this fight really get decided? It's exactly in that. Because with Sean Strickland, you're always running the risk of losing the fight by a close decision because sometimes he is too comfortable going backwards insofar as he's still landing because he's very accurate. And someone like Dricus du Plessis, who's just going to absolutely keep coming forward. Now, what am I saying? I'm trying to say that Sean Strickland has a risk of always losing this fight with Dricus du Plessis because Dricus is a force of nature. He's always going to come forward. You're not going to be able to push him backwards for 5 rounds. It's just not possible. I don't believe I'll ever see that. At least not at this point when Dricus du Plessis is champion and in a dominant fashion the way he is and in his prime, in his physical ability that he has and his attributes. He's just too big, too strong, and it's his entire game plan that he's manufactured over a very illustrious kickboxing and MMA career so far. But Sean Strickland, what am I trying to say? I think for me, as I'm thinking through this, I'm thinking Sean Strickland will have to go into this fight a little bit more aggressive than usual. And by aggressive, I mean he's going to have to throw some harder shots and get more respect out of Dricus to make sure that he has a chance of being the one pushing him back for more rounds than Dricus is pushing him back, because that's where this fight is going to be won. I don't see a world in which Dricus du Plessis takes a step back, as I've said. And for me, It's very, very key in this fight. I'd love to know what you guys think about that. The problem is, right, judges are never going to award Sean Strickland for landing on the way back. And, sometimes that might be a problem for fans because, or for Sean Strickland especially, because he's the one in there. He knows if for fighters in general, I believe, they know if something's hitting them hard or if it's shots are skimming or if it didn't really affect them at all and they were still landing even though they were going backwards. And sometimes judges will more so pay attention to the fighter that's going forward. I think even in that third round, please, again, check for me, guys. I'm in need of help and I want discussion from everybody. We're all in this together. I think in that third round of their first fight for the championship, they actually landed the same significant strikes, or Sean Strickland landed one more. But with Dricus du Plessis, he's going to throw with bad intentions every single time, and he's the one coming forward most of the time. So you've got even if you land the same significant strikes, even if your accuracy is higher, the judges, the fans, and even Dricus himself, your opponent, are going to think Dricus is winning. He's going to gain more momentum. And so what does Strickland have to do? As I said, he's got to land some big shots and he's got to go for it and not be as patient. Now, it's a hard situation. It's a blessing and a curse for Sean Strickland. His patience, his IQ, his defensive completeness on the feet and in the wrestling takedowns is what is going to win him this fight. But it's also what sometimes loses him those close decisions. That's what I really wanted to talk about. Now with Dricus, I want to focus a bit more on him right now, and I'm turning away because it's hard for me to explain how I feel about Dricus du Plessis. Sometimes, especially when he fought Israel Adesanya, who is probably my favorite fighter, still is and will always be, I think. When you have a technician like Israel Adesanya in there and you see someone like Dricus du Plessis who does look wild, who does look clumsy. Clumsy is a word I'm using that Dricus himself has described his fighting style, his coaches. So I'm not trying to be offensive. It just is the reality of the situation. But if you look at it, he's middleweight champion of the world. He beat Robert Whittaker. He beat Israel Adesanya. He beat Darren Till. I think he beat Derek Brunson. He's beat a lot of the top guys. He's beat Sean Strickland, of course. So you can't say anything. But the more I do watch his fights, I understand, okay, this guy is a lot better than I was giving him credit for. Because he's intelligent. He knows his limitations. He knows he's not going to come out there and look like Anderson Silva or Michael Venom Page or Israel Adesanya or, even someone like Sean O'Malley or Conor McGregor. These are very fluid, very nice strikers. But he does apply a lot of the same principles, or he applies a lot of fundamental principles that make him so effective. You see in that first fight, Dricus du Plessis switching stances constantly. He's able to fight out of both stances. He's able to push you back, even go square for a second, and switch stances and keep the pressure on you. He's got great takedowns. He's got very, very good leg kicks. He can go to the head kick very easily, and he has serious power. But obviously, his biggest advantage, as I've said before, is his ability to bulldoze and go forward, and his output. His output to power ratio is insane, and that's what makes him so effective. And his shots look slow, but they always seem to connect. I mean, it hit Robert Whittaker, it hit Israel Adesanya, it dropped IZZY before the finish, if you remember. It landed on Sean Strickland. So this is a really difficult fight to predict because there is an obvious pathway for Sean Strickland in terms of on paper, right? I'm not saying it's easy. He needs to be the one pushing Sean Strickland, DDP back, excuse me. And as I just said, you do see DDP switch stances and he does get squared up. So there are opportunities in the middle of that stance switch, kind of like we saw Imavov do to IZZY Adesanya, right? When the fighter who is switching stances is squared up, that's when you push in and crack the right hand. Sometimes Sean Strickland is not, reluctant's not the right word. He's not reluctant to enter that space. He actually intellectually and fight smart decides not to because he's a fighter who puts himself at an extremely low risk. Despite sometimes of saying he's going to go to war, he's a tactician and he understands the danger that these elite guys are offering, which he spoke about in interviews this week. But I think if you want my official prediction, I do believe that Dricus du Plessis is going to win this fight this weekend. And it sounds strange because he's so unorthodox. He's not the most easy on the eye fighter, but everybody who was not a believer, including myself, has to come to the reality that Dricus du Plessis is the best middleweight in the world right now. If you're not considering Khamzat Chimaev, and maybe that's a lot of people's best middleweight in the world as well. But it's a very, very interesting fight this weekend. I believe DDP is going to win. I believe he has enough just in terms of his ability to keep going, his output, his power, the wrestling mixed in. And I think at the end of the day, we've seen it this week. We've seen the quotes and we've seen Sean Strickland talk about it too. You know, Dricus du Plessis said, am I willing to die? Yes, I'm willing to. If you're willing to kill another man, you got to be willing to die. And you see Sean Strickland say, I'm not going to break. He's not going to break. And that's what it is. So you do have a battle of the willpowers here. I just feel like who have I seen respond to adversity better in their career? For me so far, it has to be Dricus du Plessis. He's been hit hard. He's been hurt. He's been tired and exhausted, especially earlier in his UFC career. And when we saw Sean Strickland, albeit, you know, a valid excuse in terms of how bad the cut was on his eye, he wasn't able to fight through that in terms of that fourth round. He wasn't able to deal with it. He wasn't able to win that round. But who caused that cut? And that, at the end of the day, that's the thing. So for me, Dricus du Plessis, I feel like he's more unbreakable and more willing to throw himself into the fire than Sean Strickland. And that's, at the end of the day, what's always going to win this matchup for me. And we'll see. You know, Sean Strickland is a very good fighter. He could prove me completely wrong, but I'm excited to see what you guys think about that. And now I want to move on to an extremely difficult conversation for me, because Israel Adesanya lost last weekend. If you haven't seen it yet, please go look. If you're listening on audio on Spotify, and if you're watching this right now on YouTube, please go look at the reaction video I did for UFC Saudi Arabia. You'll see my reactions to both the MVP co-main event with Shara Bullet as he got dominated, and obviously you see me react to Israel Adesanya getting knocked out by Imavov. And the question becomes, you know, kind of directly to me in terms of this lovely community that I'm building over here. What do I think about Israel Adesanya? I'm going over to my channel right now because I made a video. And the video was entitled, let's see what I put it in at the end. Israel Adesanya is washed in quotation marks. And I told UFC fans to be better. The premise of that video was, for me, in my own words and my own opinion and through research and studying Israel Adesanya for a long time, was me saying there is no evidence to say Israel Adesanya is quote unquote washed, because I thought I had seen no diminishment in his skills. I didn't necessarily see a diminishment, if that's a word, or kind of a decreased durability in terms of his ability to take a shot. But now I have to say that two things. I'm going to start here. What should Israel Adesanya do next? And the answer is none of my business, none of your business, none of the fans' business, none of the UFC's business, none of his agent's business, none of anyone's business, apart from him and his coaches, Eugene, his teammates, because at the end of the day, it's his decision what happens next. He's the most established middleweight we've ever had, apart from Anderson Silva. I think he's the only two-time middleweight champion ever. He's one of the best fighters I've ever seen with my own two eyes. He's my favorite fighter. He's got some of the best kickboxing we've ever seen. Really paved the way for guys like Alex Pereira. And, you know, he's provided so many of the greatest moments, so many title defenses, so many title fights in a row. Always stepped up to the challenge, always pushed the boundaries of this game, and always represented the sport with the utmost class. And, you know, kind of, despite 3 losses, it does not and should not affect his legacy in terms of MMA. You know, this is one of the greatest champions we've ever had. The star who filled the vacuum, who filled the void when Conor McGregor really, although we didn't know it then, really announced his departure from the sport in terms of a central figure, key to fighting, key to pay-per-view cards, and he became the star. You know, I think the MMA community in terms of where UFC is now, how popular it all is, owes a lot to Israel Adesanya. So yes, it's up to him. I'm not going to say personally what I think he should do or not, because at the end of the day, when it's a fighter who's still 35, who still presented amazing skills. I mean, won the first round, actually, my ESPN bugged out and I didn't see some of the first round, but going back and watching it, obviously, after the fact, he was doing very well. His offensive skills have not diminished whatsoever. What has happened, which is, a reality of being as good as Israel Adesanya is, being at the top so long, being the champion with the legacy that he has, is that some people have had enough film, which is hours and hours and hours and tens of fights, to see some small holes in his game. And I'm not saying that because I think I've seen those holes. I'm just saying, I saw Joaquin Buckley post that he saw this hole, and obviously Imavov was able to capitalize on it, which is the fact that Israel Adesanya sometimes backs up with the chin in the air and the arms out straight because he's so long and rangy and has worked for his entire career and made him the champion who he is. But it was after he got that eye poke from Imavov, he kind of waved it off to the ref, steps back, switches stance, and gets cracked. Now, is that a small mistake on his part to not take time for the eye poke? Yes and no. I mean, there's benefits to doing both. If you feel like it's not that bad and I want to keep going and I don't want Imavov to recover whatsoever, I feel like I'm doing well and want to keep the pressure on, by all means, keep carrying on. But, in hindsight, it's always 2020. You never know, right? So maybe you think he should have taken the rest. It doesn't really matter. It's not an important issue. But what I will say is that maybe Imavov did enough film study and Imavov is really good. So he saw that hole, he see what he could exploit. He saw that he just poked Israel Adesanya in the eye and was able to take advantage, and it was fair game. It was not an early stoppage, I don't believe. But for me, as a fan who, honestly cares about Israel Adesanya, obviously I don't know him personally. He's not my friend. He's not somebody I've ever spoken to. But as a fan, as somebody who really admires not only his work in the octagon, but what he's done for MMA, what he represents in terms of the new generation of fighters, always being yourself, always protecting himself, always being so open and honest about the way he wants to interact with fans. I've always found that interesting and I've always found that very compelling. I've always felt like if you are someone who, I think there was a period of time I feel like where he was very clear about setting boundaries with fans. And I thought that was very cool. I respected it a lot because he's always been so open with that dialogue. So for me, as somebody who has this amount of respect for him and who, for me, these losses don't affect the legacy that I see him in, there's two things. One, what else does he need to achieve in the sport? There's not really much else he can do, in my opinion. But number two, I don't want to see any fighter I like take more damage. I don't want to see any fighter who has already achieved the top of this game take any more damage. And I remember watching a Joe Rogan clip once. I think it was when he was telling Brendan Schaub to retire. You don't ride for free. Nobody rides for free in this game. And with somebody like Israel Adesanya, who has been so evasive, hasn't been hit that much in his career in regards to, at least in the ratio to how many fights he's had before MMA and kickboxing and boxing and all of this stuff. In these last 4 fights, I would say, since getting stopped by Alex Pereira the first time, and then coming back, getting hit quite a bit in that rematch, obviously getting the knockout win. Sean Strickland dropped him, landed a bunch of shots, even though he didn't put him out, landed a bunch of shots in that fight that days Israel Adesanya. In that Dricus du Plessis fight, he gets dropped before the submission. And then obviously now, what I would say, at least in, the UFC, is probably the most hurt I've seen Israel Adesanya when he gets dropped with the right hand, and then there's that follow-up left hook against the cage and kind of some more follow-up shots on the ground. It's a lot of damage for Israel Adesanya's standards, and I don't want to see him take any more, just out of care for him more than a fighter. I really respect him. I think he's an intelligent person. He's got a lot going on outside of fighting, and I don't want to see him take any more. Now, does that mean I think he should start fighting? Not necessarily. I mean, it's up to him, as I said. So completely with that. But you do think about, the stuff he's done in this sport. I mean, my biggest memories of him is me staying up when I was in London, staying up till 4 or 5 in the morning, watching that Gastelum war. I mean, that made me one of the biggest fans of a fighter I've ever seen. The levels and depths he went to achieve what he did against Gastelum, when he's in that corner, and I'll put the screenshot up, you can see it in his face. He's like, I'm ready to die. I'm prepared for this. Obviously staying up all night to watch him knock out Robert Whittaker to get the middleweight belt, seeing him come out the tunnel, do that dance. really establishing himself as a star. And then obviously I remember exactly where I was on every Israel Adesanya fight. I was in my living room for that. Then when he got hurt in that first round against Alex Pereira, I was at my friend's apartment here in New York City. When he came back and beat Alex Pereira and knocked him out, I was at my uncle's house. Stayed up quite late. And I remember every single fight. I mean, I was in Mexico City when he lost to Sean Strickland. I was back in London working my summer job up at 6 a.m. watching the fight when he lost to Dricus du Plessis. And I was in my apartment here in New York City when he lost to Imavov. And for me, whatever happens, if he decides to fight again, I'm all in. If he decides to hang it up, I'm all in. I'm just a huge fan of this guy. But, do I think he's washed? Now, that was a very long way of getting around to this conversation. And I'm going to say I completely reject that question. I'm done with this question. I'm a little bit disappointed in myself that I gave it any airtime. Even though the fact that I was completely refuting it in terms of my answer to it, I don't think it's helpful to this scene. It's not. Calling Israel Adesanya washed, what does that do? What precedent does that set up for how we treat our legends? Even asking that question. Even if Israel Adesanya was never able, which is impossible for anybody, by the way, to reach the heights he did again, he does not have another, whatever it is, 6, 7 title defenses. He doesn't have another 12 title fight streak ahead of him simply because of time and age. It's just not possible. But to call him washed is so disrespectful to what he already did. You can be more respectful about it. You can use language that is more sincere and at the end of the day, more beneficial to growing this scene in a healthy way. I'm tired of the you're washed. I'm tired of the fraud checked or stuff like this. It's not helpful. And at the end of the day, he's a GOAT of the sport, an absolute GOAT, right? He's greater than a lot of other fighters that a lot of people are his favorite fighters, right? He's done so much in the sport and people are so easy to forget everything. I will never call a legend of this game washed, even if they fight too long and they're grey in the beard and they're long in the tooth and they should have retired years ago. There's ways of talking about it. And by the way, Israel Adesanya is none of those things I just said. Israel Adesanya looked great in that fight until he got caught. He's still got speed. He's still got his movement. He's still got his ability to fight off both stances, go to the body. He was really, really good in that fight. And if you look at my reaction, obviously I mentioned before, there's one point where obviously in that first round, I believe Imavov lands a huge uppercut. And IZZY, instead of circling out, stands there in the pocket, sits down on his punches, throws 2 hooks and catches Imavov. That's the growth in his game and how I know his preparation for this fight was apex. Because that's the type of stuff he did in that second Alex Pereira fight where he knew I'm him. I'm going to sit down on my punches and I'm going to fight. So it does get to me a little bit when people, not just about IZZY, even though he's my favorite fighter and I'm being open about that. But anybody, like people do that with Kamaru Usman. And it's like, okay, yes, he's lost some fights. Cool. But he looked good in those. Is he washed? No. Now he's taking the time to heal from his injuries and come back and we're going to see him again. So when people have done stuff like Kamaru did, probably the second at one point was definitely on track in my mind to be the first greatest welterweight of all time. Definitely pound for pound number 1 at one point in his career. When people like him, like Volkanovski, like Israel Adesanya, it's like people calling Demetrius Johnson washed after he lost to Moraes in one championship. It's like, obviously he wasn't washed. He got caught. It was a good fight. Adrian Moraes is good. And I get it. If you're on a losing streak, it gives people in some sort of way reasoning to say that. But you have to apply context. I think that all matters. And for me, all I'm going to end this on is, be better UFC fans, be better MMA fans, okay? This space, this community, the Backseat Fighter Pod, this logo right here that's on the wall, me standing here doing these episodes every week and the videos and really trying to grow the space in a healthy way is all about understanding what these fighters are. They're special human beings. you know? They do a special thing. They put it all on the line for our entertainment. And, you know, I've spoken to Cage Warriors fighters. I've spoken to UFC fighters. I've spoken to, you know, enough fighters now, people training just casually, coaches, everyone in this space that I've spoken to so far. It makes you understand how hard it is to even think about, to even dream about being the level someone like Israel Adesanya was at. So, you know, do I think he can go win another championship? He doesn't need to go win another championship. And it's not even, you know, it's not our choice. It's Israel Adesanya's choice. It's kind of like in you know, the NBA terms, right? It's kind of like a franchise player deciding where he wants to be traded. Or, you know, it's completely up to Izzy. He's done enough for the UFC, for himself, for his team in the sport, so he can decide his own future, and he should fully respect that. He doesn't care about what I'm saying, doesn't care what anybody else is saying. It's all going to be down to him at the end of the day. But that's going to be it for episode 20 of the Backseat Fighter podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed this style a little bit more, kind of a return to where this podcast started. You know, we did a bit of the final analysis of the main event this weekend, but obviously a bigger discussion in the end, and I really enjoyed it. So, like, subscribe, and you know what? I'll see you for episode 21. Keep an eye out for more content, and of course, that giveaway is in the works. So, please subscribe to be entered into that eventually, and I'll see you next time. Episode 21. This has been Charlie. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.